Good evening, friends. Tonight we'll drift into quiet corners of history together. Dim your lights, settle under your blanket, and let your body sink into comfort. Feel the weight of the day lifting from your shoulders, dissolving into the soft darkness around you. Before we begin, I'm curious. Where in the world are you joining from tonight? What time is it where you are? Share it in the comments if you feel like it. I love imagining all of us scattered across the globe, finding this moment of peace together. If this calm journey helps you unwind, tap like and subscribe, only if it feels right. No rush, no pressure, just a quiet evening together as we wander through stories that time has almost forgotten. Tonight, we're going to travel, not with machines or magic, but with imagination. We're stepping into worlds where survival meant knowing which soap to use, where a wrong word could cost you everything, and where queens dissolved fortunes in cups of wine just to prove a point. Close your eyes if you'd like. Let the modern world fade. And let's begin. Imagine you wake up tomorrow morning, but something is wrong. The street outside your window is unpaved. The air smells like smoke and animals and something you can't quite place. You look down and your pajamas have been replaced by rough wool that scratches your skin. Congratulations, you've just time-traveled to medieval Europe, somewhere around the year 1250, and you have approximately 48 hours before you make a fatal mistake. Let me tell you why your 21st century habits are about to become a death sentence. First, that shampoo you love, the one that smells like coconut and vanilla and makes your hair so soft. Forget it exists. Actually, forget the concept of smelling good entirely. In medieval Europe, pleasant scents on a common person are suspicious. They're unnatural. They suggest wealth you shouldn't have, or worse, they suggest witchcraft. You see, most people in this time bathed perhaps once a month if they were fastidious, maybe 3 or 4 times a year if they were typical. The smell of unwashed bodies mixed with wood smoke and animal fat was the default human scent. It was normal. It was safe. It was expected. But here you come, scrubbing yourself with modern soap, working that lavender-scented lather into your hair, emerging clean and fragrant. Within a day, people are whispering. Within 2 days, someone mentions it to the priest. By day 3, you're being asked pointed questions about how you acquired such luxuries, whether you've made pacts with dark forces, whether the devil himself taught you these cleansing rituals. I know what you're thinking. Surely being clean is good? Surely people would admire cleanliness. But this is a world operating on completely different logic. Cleanliness isn't next to godliness here. In fact, excessive bathing is sometimes seen as vanity, a sin, an obsession with the flesh that distracts from spiritual purity. Saints were often praised for their unwashed state, for their holy stench that proved they'd transcended bodily concerns. So rule 1, and listen carefully, because this could save your life. Blend in with the smell. Let the wood smoke from the hearth cling to your clothes. Let your hair grow dull with the natural oils that would have horrified your modern self. Rub a little dirt on your hands before you meet anyone. Smell like earth and smoke and honest work. Smell human by their standards, not yours. Now let's talk about your teeth. You probably brushed them this morning with toothpaste containing fluoride, maybe even used an electric toothbrush. Your smile is likely whiter and straighter than 99% of people who lived before 1800. This is a problem. In medieval Europe, your teeth should be yellowed, maybe a bit crooked, possibly missing a few by the time you're 30. Perfect white teeth mark you as other, as strange, as possibly not entirely human. There are stories from this period about fairies and demons who could be identified by their uncanny perfection. Too beautiful, too clean, too symmetrical, these creatures would infiltrate human communities only to be discovered because something about them didn't feel quite right. Your modern dental work puts you in that category. Those straight white teeth are basically a neon sign reading "not from around here." And don't even think about smiling too much. Showing your teeth frequently is seen as aggressive in many contexts, even threatening. A closed mouth expression, perhaps a slight upward turn of the lips, that's your safest bet. Save the wide smiles for when you return to the 21st century where they belong. Let's move on to food, because this is where things get really dangerous, really cast. You are accustomed to food safety standards that wouldn't be invented for another 700 years. You expect meat to be refrigerated, vegetables to be washed, water to be treated. Here, none of that exists. The water, especially in towns and cities, is often contaminated with waste. Rivers serve as both water sources and sewers. The safest thing to drink is usually weak beer or ale, which has been boiled during brewing, killing most of the harmful bacteria, but you don't know this yet. You're thirsty. You see a well, you drink. Within hours, your stomach is cramping. Within a day, you're experiencing dysentery that could easily kill you because medical understanding of hydration and bacterial infection is centuries away. The remedies they'll offer, if you're lucky enough to receive any, involve herbs and prayers and possibly bloodletting, which will make you worse, not better. So rule 2, drink the ale. Yes, even for breakfast. It's weak, usually around 1 to 3% alcohol, just enough to make it safe. Think of it as medieval Gatorade. And when you eat, choose foods that have been thoroughly cooked. Avoid raw vegetables if you can. They may have been fertilized with human waste. Stick to bread, cooked grains, well-done meat if you can afford it. Your modern stomach, accustomed to antibiotics and preservatives, is woefully unprepared for medieval bacteria. Now let's discuss your clothing and what it reveals about you. You need to understand that in this world, clothing is a language, a legal document, and a social contract, all woven into one. Laws called sumptuary laws dictate exactly what each class of person can wear. The color of your cloak, the fabric of your tunic, the style of your sleeves, all of these communicate your social status as clearly as words. Violating these codes isn't just fashion forward. It's illegal. It can result in fines, public humiliation, or worse. Purple dye, for instance, is incredibly expensive, derived from thousands of sea snails. It's reserved for royalty and the highest nobility. If you, a common person, show up wearing purple, you're either a thief or dangerously ambitious, possibly both. Rich scarlet reds, deep blues, these are also costly and restricted. Your safest colors are browns, grays, muddy greens, undyed wools and linens, dull, humble, invisible. The same goes for jewelry. That simple silver ring you wear, it suggests wealth. Where did you get it? Can you prove you didn't steal it? Even if you can, it marks you as someone with resources, which makes you a target. Travelers on medieval roads were often robbed, sometimes killed, for far less than the shoes on their feet. Better to appear poor, to seem like robbing you, would be more trouble than it's worth. Let me paint you a picture of what walking through a medieval town actually feels like, because the sensory reality is so different from what movies show us. The streets are narrow, sometimes only 6 feet wide between buildings that lean toward each other, blocking out much of the sky. The ground beneath your feet isn't paved. It's packed earth or sometimes cobblestones, and it's covered with a mixture of mud, animal droppings, food scraps, and human waste that's being tossed from windows above. You learn quickly to walk in the center of the street, away from the buildings. Because the warning cry, Gardilu, means someone is about to empty a chamber pot from a second-story window. The smell is intense and inescapable. Rotting vegetables, urine, the metallic tang of blood from the butcher's shop, the acrid smoke from countless cooking fires and workshops. Tanneries, where leather is processed using urine and animal feces, create a stench so powerful that they're usually located on the outskirts of town, but the wind carries hints of it everywhere. The sounds are different too. No cars, no electrical hum, no airplanes overhead. Instead you hear hoofbeats on stone, the creak of wooden cartwheels, blacksmiths' hammers ringing on anvils, chickens clucking, dogs barking, church bells marking the hours and calling the faithful to prayer. And voices, so many voices, speaking languages and dialects that would sound almost foreign to modern English speakers, even if they're supposedly speaking English. Because here's another problem you're going to face. Language. Even if you've landed in England and you speak modern English, Middle English is going to sound very strange to your ears. It's almost like a different language with different grammar, different pronunciation, and vocabulary that includes many words we've lost. You might understand one word in 3 maybe. You'll have to learn to speak slowly, simply, and hope people assume you're from a distant region or have some speech impediment rather than suspecting the truth, that you're from a time so distant it might as well be a different world. Let's talk about night for a moment, because nighttime in the Middle Ages is unlike anything you've experienced unless you've been deep in the wilderness with no artificial light. When the sun sets, darkness falls like a curtain. There are no streetlights, no illuminated signs, no glow of screens. If you can afford a candle, a single candle, you're lucky. Candles are expensive, made from tallow or beeswax, and they don't last long. Most people simply go to bed when it gets dark and rises with the sun. The night belongs to danger, to robbers and wolves, and things people don't like to name out loud. If you must go out at night, you carry a lantern if you can afford one, or a torch, and you don't go alone. The shadows are deep and complete. You can't see your hand in front of your face on a moonless night. The stars, though, oh, the stars are magnificent, undimmed by any light pollution. The Milky Way sprawls across the sky like a river of light. People navigate by stars, tell time by them, see messages from God in them. You might find yourself understanding for the first time why ancient peoples were so obsessed with the heavens. When the stars are your only light, they become everything. Now here's something that might save your life. Understanding the power structure. Medieval society is rigidly hierarchical. At the top is the king, beneath him the nobles, then the clergy, then the knights, then the merchants and craftsmen, then the peasants, and at the very bottom the serfs, who are barely above slaves. You need to figure out where you fit in this structure immediately, because your behavior, your speech, even your posture must match your station. If you're dressed as a peasant, you bow your head to everyone above you, which is nearly everyone. You don't make eye contact with nobles. You use deferential language. You step aside when your betters pass. If you're lucky enough to pass as a merchant or craftsman, you have slightly more freedom, but you're still careful around nobility and clergy. The wrong word, the wrong gesture, can result in punishment that ranges from a beating to execution, depending on how offended the powerful person feels. And speaking of execution, let me tell you what crimes can get you killed, because the list might surprise you. Theft, yes. Murder, obviously. But also poaching game from noble lands, even if you're starving. Speaking against the church. Being accused of witchcraft by the wrong person. Insulting a noble. Sometimes just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Justice isn't blind here. It's deeply personal, often arbitrary, And there's no appeals process, no defense attorney, no concept of innocence until proven guilty. So rule 3, and this is crucial, keep your head down, your mouth shut, and your opinions to yourself. Don't try to impress anyone with knowledge from the future. Don't mention that the earth revolves around the sun. Don't suggest improvements to their farming techniques or medical practices. Don't question religious doctrine. Don't advocate for social change. Every one of these things can and will be used against you. Survival means invisibility. Blend in, agree, nod, say nothing that marks you as different. Let me tell you about a man named Simon. Not his real name because I'm inventing him, but based on dozens of real accounts. Simon was a peasant in 13th century England who made the mistake of being too clever. He learned to read somehow, perhaps from a kind priest or a discarded manuscript. He started asking questions about theological doctrine. He wondered aloud why God would allow suffering if he was truly benevolent. Harmless questions, philosophical musings, but someone reported him. Within a week, he was questioned by church officials. Within 2 weeks, he was accused of heresy. He recanted, swore he'd been confused, and begged forgiveness. It didn't matter. They burned him as an example. His crime? Thinking too much and speaking those thoughts aloud. This is the world you've landed in. Beautiful in some ways, yes. Simpler in others, but dangerous in ways that your modern mind struggles to comprehend because the dangers aren't just physical, they're ideological. They're spiritual in the sense that questioning the wrong things can condemn not just your body but your eternal soul, at least according to the authorities who control every aspect of life. And so you wake up in medieval Europe. You have your knowledge, your modern sensibilities, your 21st century immune system that's either going to save you or kill you depending on what you encounter first. What do? You find the dullest, roughest clothes you can. You stop bathing. You drink the ale. You learn the prayers even if you don't believe them. You recite them word perfect because everyone around you will notice if you don't. You work, whatever work you can find, and you don't complain. You bow, you scrape, you survive, day by day, hour by hour, until maybe, just maybe, whatever brought you here takes you home. And as you drift off tonight, safe in your bed with your modern plumbing and your electric lights and your freedom to think whatever you want, maybe you feel just a little more grateful for the time you were born into. Maybe you appreciate the invisible infrastructure of safety and cleanliness and knowledge that surrounds you every day. Maybe you close your eyes and whisper a small thank you to the centuries of progress that separate you from that rough wool tunic and that dangerous medieval street. Breathe in, breathe out. Let's journey deeper to where thinking itself becomes rebellion. Imagine you're standing in a medieval monastery, the kind you've seen in pictures with vaulted stone ceilings and narrow windows that let in shafts of dusty light. The air is cool and damp, smelling of old parchment and candle wax and incense that lingers in the stone. It's quiet here, so quiet you can hear your own breathing, the soft shuffle of a monk's sandals on the floor somewhere in the distance. You've managed to survive your first weeks in the Middle Ages by following the rules. Stay dirty, stay humble, stay silent. But now you're facing a new problem. You have knowledge. You have information that could save lives, improve agriculture, cure diseases. And you're realizing with growing horror that sharing any of it could get you killed. Let me explain the trap you're in. The medieval church isn't just a religious institution. It's the government, the education system, the hospital network, the social safety net, and the thought police all rolled into one massive, all-encompassing structure. The church owns approximately 1/3 of all land in Europe. It collects tithes, mandatory donations of 10% of everyone's income. It runs the only schools, the only universities, the only scriptoriums where books are copied by hand. If you want to learn to read, you learn from the church. If you want to study anything, philosophy, medicine, law, you study under church supervision, and everything you learn must align with church doctrine. Now, church doctrine in the 13th century is based on a mixture of biblical teaching and the preserved works of ancient Greek and Roman philosophers, particularly Aristotle. The model of the universe that the church teaches is geocentric. Earth sits motionless at the center of creation, with the sun, moon, stars, and planets rotating around it in perfect crystalline spheres. This isn't just science to them, it's theology. Earth is at the center because humanity is at the center of God's plan, and humanity needs to be at the center physically as well as spiritually. To suggest otherwise isn't just incorrect, it's blasphemous. It diminishes humanity's importance in creation. It questions God's design. You, with your modern education, know this is completely wrong. You know Earth orbits the sun. You know stars are distant suns, that the universe is incomprehensibly vast, that Earth is a tiny planet in an average solar system, in an ordinary galaxy among billions. You know this with absolute certainty. But you can never, ever say it, because here's what happens if you do. Let me tell you about a man named Giordano Bruno. Though he won't be born for another few centuries from where we are now, in 1548, Bruno was a philosopher and mathematician who proposed that the stars were distant suns, that the universe was infinite, that there might be other worlds with other forms of life. He said these things openly, wrote them down, taught them. The church arrested him, held him for 8 years while they questioned him and gave him opportunities to recant. He refused. In the year 1600, they burned him alive in a public square in Rome. His crime? Having the wrong ideas about cosmology and refusing to pretend otherwise. Now you might think, well, that's still centuries away from our 1250 setting. Surely things are even stricter now before the Renaissance, before any scientific revolution. And you'd be absolutely right. You're in a time when questioning church teaching isn't just dangerous, it's almost unthinkable. The very framework of how people understand knowledge and truth is different. Truth isn't discovered through experimentation and observation. Truth is revealed by God, interpreted by church authorities, and accepted by the faithful. To suggest that you could learn truth through empirical observation, that you could test and verify things yourself, is to suggest that God's revelation is insufficient, that human reason might contradict divine wisdom. That's heresy. That's pride. That's the sin of Lucifer himself, thinking he knew better than God, so you stay quiet about the solar system. But what about medicine? Surely you could save lives with basic knowledge about germs, about sterilization, about the importance of clean water? Let me tell you why you can't. Medieval medicine is based on the theory of the 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness is understood as an imbalance of these humours, and treatment involves restoring balance through bloodletting, purging, special diets, or herbal remedies. The idea that tiny invisible creatures called bacteria or viruses cause disease doesn't exist yet. It can't exist because it contradicts the accepted medical framework that's been passed down from ancient Greek physicians like Galen, whose works are considered authoritative and are taught in every medical school. You're watching someone die of an infection that antibiotics could cure in a week. You know that if they just washed the wound with clean water and kept it covered, they'd have a much better chance. You know that bloodletting is making them weaker, not stronger. But if you speak up, what happens? The physician, who has trained for years in the traditional methods, is offended. The patient's family is confused and distrustful. Where did you learn this? Who taught you? What gives you the authority to contradict established medicine? If the patient dies anyway, and they very well might because you've intervened too late or because medieval conditions make infection almost impossible to stop, you could be blamed. You could be accused of witchcraft, of causing death through unnatural means. Better to say nothing. Better to watch them perform the bloodletting, to nod sympathetically, to offer to pray for the patient. Prayer is always safe. Prayer is always appropriate. In a world where you can't do anything else, prayer is your refuge. Let me describe what a typical Sunday Mass feels like, because this is where you'll spend a significant portion of your time if you want to avoid suspicion. Church attendance isn't optional. Missing Mass without an excellent reason, like being physically unable to move, is noted and punished, sometimes with fines, sometimes with public penance. So every Sunday and on holy days, which are numerous, you join the crowd walking to the parish church. The church is the largest building in most villages, usually the only stone structure, its tower visible from miles away. Inside it's dim and cool, the air thick with incense smoke. The walls are covered with painted images, biblical scenes rendered in bright colors because most people can't read. These pictures are their Bible, their textbook, their window into sacred stories. There's a mural of the Last Judgment, with Christ enthroned above, the saved rising to heaven on one side, the damned dragged down to hell on the other. Hell is painted in vivid detail, demons with pitchforks, sinners boiling in cauldrons, the gaping mouth of Leviathan swallowing souls. It's meant to terrify, and it does. Children grow up seeing these images weekly, internalizing the eternal consequences of sin. The Mass is conducted in Latin, which you probably don't understand, and neither do most of the people around you. The priest faces the altar with his back to the congregation, speaking the sacred words in a language that's foreign to most listeners. You don't need to understand, you just need to be present, to stand and kneel at the appropriate times, to cross yourself, to take communion when it's offered. The Eucharist, the bread and wine that the Church teaches, literally becomes the body and blood of Christ through transubstantiation. This is the most sacred moment. You receive it on your tongue, you don't chew, you let it dissolve. To drop it or spit it out or handle it irreverently is a grave sin. You listen to the sermon, delivered in the local language so everyone can understand. The priest talks about sin and salvation, about the importance of tithing, about the dangers of heresy, about obedience to authority, both divine and earthly. He might tell stories of saints who suffered martyrdom, of miracles, of demons who tempted the faithful. He reminds you that this life is temporary, a testing ground, and that the life to come is eternal. He reminds you that your immortal soul is at stake in every choice you make. He reminds you that the Church, and only the Church, holds the keys to salvation. This is the background hum of medieval life, constant and inescapable. And it means that every piece of knowledge you have, every scientific fact, every technological insight has to be filtered through the question, does this contradict Church teaching? If yes, forget it, bury it. Pretend you never knew it. Let's talk about astronomy, because this is one area where your knowledge is particularly dangerous. You look up at the night sky and you know what you're seeing. That bright, steady light is Venus, a planet with a thick atmosphere of carbon dioxide. That reddish one is Mars, a desert world with polar ice caps. Those wandering stars that move against the fixed background are planets, worlds like Earth, orbiting the sun. The moon's light is reflected sunlight. The stars are distant suns, some of them already dead, their light taking years to reach Earth. You know all of this. But around you, people see something completely different. They see the heavens as a realm of perfection, unchanging and eternal, made of a different substance than the corrupt, fallen Earth, the wandering stars, the planets. They're moved by angels in their celestial spheres. The patterns they make in the sky, their conjunctions and oppositions, these are signs from God about events on Earth. Astrology isn't a superstition here. It's a respected science taught in universities, consulted by kings. The position of stars at your birth determines your temperament and fate. Eclipses are omens, comets are portents of disaster, usually predicting plague or war or the death of a king. When a comet appears in 1066, shortly before the Norman invasion of England, everyone sees it as God's warning about the coming upheaval. It's even sewn into the Bayeux tapestry, this embroidered record of the conquest, with people pointing at the comet in fear. To you, it's just a chunk of ice and rock on an elliptical orbit. To them, it's the finger of God writing warnings in the sky. You have to learn to see the sky as they do, or at least pretend to. When someone points out an astrological sign, you nod. When they interpret a meteor as an omen, you agree. When they consult an astrologer before making important decisions, you don't laugh. You definitely don't explain what meteors actually are or suggest that the patterns of stars are random, meaningless at least in terms of predicting human events. That would be worse than wrong. It would mark you as someone who doesn't understand how God communicates with his creation. Let me tell you what happens in a typical medieval trial for heresy, because understanding this helps you grasp why silence truly is life insurance-y. Someone accuses you, perhaps a neighbor you quarreled with, perhaps someone who envies something you have. The accusation doesn't have to be specific. They said strange things. They questioned their faith. I heard them speak against the church. That's enough to start an investigation. Church officials, trained inquisitors, if the matter is serious enough, question you. They ask about your beliefs, your practices, your reading if you can read. They ask leading questions designed to trap you. Do you believe the bread and wine of communion literally become Christ's body and blood? If you hesitate, if you say it's symbolic, you've just confessed heresy. Do you believe the Pope is Christ's representative on earth? Any answer but an immediate yes is suspect. They might question your neighbors, people you thought were friends. In this climate of fear, many will say whatever they think the inquisitors want to hear, implicating you to save themselves. If you're accused of witchcraft, the evidence can include anything unusual about you. Are you left-handed? That's suspicious. Do you own a cat? Cats are familiars, demons in animal form. Did someone get sick after quarreling with you? That's proof of a curse. Did you float when they tested you by throwing you in the pond? That proves your guilt, because the pure water rejected your corrupted form. Did you sink and nearly drown? Well, at least you're innocent. Small comfort as you cough up water. Torture is an accepted method of investigation. The logic is that if you're innocent, God will give you strength to maintain your innocence under torture. If you confess even a confession extracted through unbearable pain, it's taken as truth. Many people confess to anything, everything, just to make the pain stop. Yes, I'm a witch. Yes, I consorted with demons. Yes, I cursed my neighbor's cow. None of it true, all of it said in desperation. And all of it used to justify the execution that follows. The execution might be burning, the preferred method for heretics because it's believed to purify through fire, destroying the corrupted flesh completely, or hanging, or drowning, or any number of methods that medieval justice employs. Often, Executions are public events attended by crowds, meant to be both punishment and warning. This is what happens to those who stray from the path. This is what happens to those who question, watch, and learn, and obey. So when I say silence is life insurance, I mean it literally. Every day that you keep your modern knowledge locked inside, every time you bite your tongue when you see suffering, you could alleviate. Every moment you bow your head and recite prayers you don't believe in, you're buying yourself another day of survival. It's not heroic. It's not noble. It's just necessary. You start to understand why the Renaissance, still centuries away, is such a dramatic break. Why the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, the gradual separation of church and state, why all of these are hard-won victories, not inevitable progress. You're living in a system that's perfectly designed to perpetuate itself, to suppress dissent, to prevent change. And it works. For centuries, it worked beautifully. At night, lying on your straw mattress in whatever dwelling you found, you stare up at the darkness and think about everything you know and can't say. You think about the people who died today from preventable diseases, the women who died in childbirth when basic hygiene and knowledge could have saved them, the children whose minds are bright and curious but who will never learn to read, who will never be encouraged to question or explore, the potential scientists and inventors and artists who'll spend their lives farming or weaving because that's what their parents did and what their children will do, and you think about your own time, your own world, and maybe you understand a little better why freedom of thought matters, why the separation of church and state matters, why scientific inquiry unbound by religious dogma matters. These aren't abstract principles. They're the difference between a world where you can be burned for being curious and a world where curiosity is celebrated. Breathe slowly. Let your body relax into the mattress beneath you. You're safe here. You can think freely here. Let's move forward through time to an arena where women fought not with words, but with steel. Close your eyes and let the medieval world fade. We're stepping further back now to ancient Rome, to a time when the Colosseum was new and the roar of crowds echoed off marble walls. I want you to imagine sand beneath your feet, hot sun beating down from a cloudless sky, and the metallic smell of blood and sweat hanging in the air. You're about to witness something that history tried to forget. Women fighting in the arena as gladiators. For the longest time, historians assumed female gladiators were a myth, or at most a rare novelty, a strange aberration in Roman entertainment. But then, in the year 2000, archaeologists in London excavated a burial site and found something remarkable. A skeleton dated to the 2nd century CE, buried with honours normally reserved for gladiators. The grave goods included burnt pine cones, suggesting the body had been on a funeral pyre. Analysis of the bones showed evidence of extreme physical stress, injuries consistent with combat. And the skeleton was female. She's been nicknamed the Great Dover Street Woman, and she changed how we understand Roman spectacle. Because here's the truth they didn't want you to know: women fought in the arena. Not often, not as commonly as male gladiators, but frequently enough that laws were passed trying to restrict it. In the year 11 CE, Emperor Augustus banned women of senatorial and equestrian rank from fighting in the arena, which means women of those classes had been doing it. In 19 CE, Emperor Tiberius banned all women under 20 from arena combat. Again, you don't ban something that isn't happening. In 200 CE, Emperor Septimius Severus banned women from the arena entirely, declaring it brought shame to the dignity of the games. By that point, female gladiators, called gladiatrices, had been part of Roman entertainment for at least 2 centuries. Let me tell you about what we know, pieced together from scattered sources, brief mentions in disapproving letters from moralists, marble reliefs that depict women in combat, and archaeological evidence like the Dover Street woman. Let me tell you what it might have been like to step into the arena as a gladiatrix, to fight for your life while thousands watched and cheered. First, understand that gladiators existed in a strange paradox of Roman society. They were among the lowest of the low, most of them slaves or condemned criminals, forced into combat. They were considered infames, people without honor, legally grouped with actors and prostitutes as shameful professions. And yet, successful gladiators were celebrities. They were sex symbols. Graffiti from Pompeii describes a gladiator named Crescens as suspirium puellarum, the sign of girls, their heartthrob. Women, and some men, wore perfume supposedly mixed with a gladiator's sweat. They were despised and adored simultaneously. For female gladiators, this paradox was even more intense. Roman society had strict expectations about women's behavior. Respectable women were modest, chaste, domestic, focused on managing households and raising children. They weren't supposed to be aggressive or physically powerful or publicly violent. A woman choosing to enter the arena or being forced into it violated every social expectation. This made female gladiators particularly scandalous, which made them particularly entertaining to audiences who loved spectacle and transgression. Some gladiatrices were slaves, purchased and trained by lanistae, the managers who owned and trained gladiators. Others were criminals condemned to the arena. But some, and this is the part that shocked Roman moralists, were volunteers. Free women who signed contracts to fight, trading their legal rights and social respectability for money, fame, and the thrill of combat. The historian Dio Cassius, writing around 200 CE, mentions with disgust that women of respectable families were appearing in the arena, not just poor, desperate women, but those who should know better. Why would a free woman volunteer for something so dangerous and degrading? The reasons varied. Money was certainly one factor. Successful gladiators could earn substantial sums, more than most Romans made in years of regular work. Fame was another. The arena offered a kind of celebrity status impossible to achieve any other way for a woman in that society. And perhaps for some, there was a desire to step outside the narrow confines of acceptable female behavior, to test themselves, to be powerful in a culture that usually denied women power. Training happened in special schools called ludi. The most famous was the Ludus Magnus in Rome, connected to the Colosseum by an underground tunnel, so gladiators could enter the arena directly. Inside these schools, gladiators lived in small cells, ate a special diet heavy in barley to build bulk and protect vital organs with a layer of fat, and trained relentlessly. They learned to fight in specific styles, each with its own weapons and armor. There were myrmiones with helmets and large shields, thraces with smaller shields and curved swords, retiarii with nets and tridents, and many others. Female gladiators seem to have trained in similar styles, though the evidence suggests they sometimes fought each other rather than male opponents, making their matches a specific category of entertainment. A marble relief found in Halicarnassus in modern-day Turkey shows 2 female gladiators named Amazon and Achillea, both armed and armored, engaged in combat. The inscription indicates the match ended in a draw, with both women being freed from the arena, a rare and honorable outcome that suggests they fought with skill and courage. Imagine being a gladiatrix. standing in the dim tunnel beneath the Colosseum, waiting for your turn. You can hear the crowd above, 50,000 voices rising and falling like waves, cheering, gasping, chanting. The air smells like animals and sweat, and the peculiar scent of the sand they spread on the arena floor to absorb blood. Your armor is heavy, the helmet restricts your vision, and your heart is pounding so hard you think everyone can hear it. You've trained for this. For months you've practiced the moves, learned to read an opponent's body language, built muscle memory that might keep you alive. You've also learned the theater of it, because gladiatorial combat isn't just about killing, it's about entertaining. You need to make it exciting, to engage the crowd, to give them the spectacle they paid for. A quick, efficient kill isn't as valuable as a dramatic, back-and-forth struggle that keeps the audience on the edge of their seats. The gate opens. The sunlight is blinding after the tunnel's darkness. You step onto the sand and the noise hits you like a physical force. Thousands of people shouting, some cheering your name if you fought before and built a following. Others just hungry for blood, for excitement, for something to break the routine of their lives. You see your opponent across the arena, armed and armored like you, perhaps someone you've trained with, perhaps a stranger. For the next few minutes, she's the person who might kill you, and you're the person who might kill her. The combat is exhausting. The armor is heavy, the sun is hot, and the adrenaline surges through you in waves, giving you strength and then leaving you shaking. You circle, you test each other, you strike and parry. The sand shifts under your feet, making footing treacherous. You hear the crowd's reactions, urging you on or groaning when you miss an opportunity. Every movement is calculated not just for effectiveness, but for effect. You play to the audience even as you fight for your life. Maybe you win. Maybe you manage to disarm your opponent or wound her badly enough that she can't continue. She drops to her knees, raises her hand in submission. The crowd's roar intensifies. They're yelling, "Miss 'em! Let her go," or "Ugula, kill her," depending on how much they enjoyed the fight and how they feel about the losing gladiator. You look up at the sponsor of the games, usually seated in a place of honor. He might consult the crowd's reaction, or he might make his own judgment. Thumb up? Thumb down? The historical reality of which gesture meant what is actually unclear, but the power dynamic isn't. Someone else decides if your opponent lives or dies, and you're the instrument of that decision. If the decision is death, you're expected to deliver it cleanly, professionally. The defeated gladiator is supposed to die with dignity, not begging or crying, but accepting the outcome with stoic courage. You strike, severing the carotid artery or stabbing through the neck vertebrae, methods trained to be quick. The body falls. Attendants dressed as Charon, the ferryman of the dead, come to drag the corpse away. Fresh sand is scattered over the blood, and you walk back through the tunnel. Alive for another day, your payment secured, your fame perhaps a little brighter. If you lose, you're the one on your knees in the sand, bleeding, exhausted, hoping the crowd and the sponsor find you worthy of mercy. Most gladiators survived their matches, at least for a while. Killing gladiators was expensive. They represented significant investment in training and upkeep. But sometimes the crowd demanded blood, or the sponsor wanted to prove his generosity by granting deaths. And sometimes you were just unlucky. Let me tell you what we know about the lives of gladiators outside the arena, because it's not all combat and death. Between fights, gladiators lived in their barracks, a strange community of people who might kill each other in the arena, but who ate together, trained together, and formed bonds. Some gladiators married, though their marriages had limited legal status. They had fans who followed their careers, who left graffiti proclaiming their favorite fighters. They were in some ways like modern athletes, celebrities whose private lives were subject to public fascination. For gladiatrices, this attention must have been particularly intense and complicated. They were spectacles, women who defied every norm of female behavior. We have accounts of wealthy Roman women being fascinated by gladiators, male and female, sometimes sexually. The satirist Juvenal writes mockingly about a senator's wife who ran off with a gladiator, abandoning her comfortable life for this disreputable but exciting man. It's presented as evidence of moral decay, women's uncontrollable passions, but it also hints at the appeal these fighters had. There's a medical text from the 2nd century CE by Galen, who served as physician to gladiators, describing treatments for their injuries. He writes about treating cuts, setting broken bones, dealing with infections. He mentions female gladiators matter-of-factly as just another category of fighter he had to treat. This casual mention is almost more convincing than dramatic accounts, because it suggests female gladiators were normal enough not to require special commentary. They were just part of the job. The great Dover Street woman, the skeleton that sparked renewed interest in gladiatrices, tells us something important about how at least one female gladiator was treated in death. She was cremated on a pyre, an expensive and honorable funeral practice. She was buried with grave goods that matched those found in other gladiator burials. This suggests she was respected, at least within the gladiatorial community, honored for her courage and skill, even if broader society considered her shameful. Think about the courage it took to step into that arena, knowing the stakes. Modern athletes risk injury, and that's significant, but gladiatrices risked death every time they fought. They did it in a society that already constrained them in every other aspect of life, dictating what they could do, who they could be, how they could express themselves. The arena was one of the few places where a woman could be powerful, violent, autonomous, even if that autonomy came at the cost of social status and constant danger, and then gradually it ended. The gladiatorial games continued for centuries, but female participation was increasingly restricted and eventually banned entirely. By the 3rd century CE, it was over. Gladiatrices disappeared from the historical record. The memory of them faded until it became easy to assume they'd never existed at all, that the scattered references were exaggerations or misunderstandings, that women had never fought in the arena. But they did. They stepped onto the sand with weapons in their hands and fought for their lives while crowds cheered. They were slaves and criminals and volunteers. They were desperate, ambitious and brave. They were entertainers and killers and survivors for as long as they survived. And history, which is so often written by people who have very specific ideas about what women should be, tried to erase them. Lying here now in your comfortable bed, safe from gladiators and lions and the roar of bloodthirsty crowds, you can close your eyes and honor them. These women whose names we mostly don't know, whose lives were hard and strange and short. Amazon and Achillea, whose names survived on a marble relief. The great Dover Street woman, whose skeleton testified to her life even when written records did not. And all the others, unnamed, unremembered, but real. Let your breath slow. Feel the safety of this moment. Let's move forward through time again to a queen who fought with different weapons, who turned banquets into battlefields and food into power. Picture this. A warm Egyptian night, the year 41 BCE, on the coast at Tarsus in modern-day Turkey. The air is thick with the scent of incense and roasting meat and Mediterranean salt water. A Roman general named Mark Antony, one of the three most powerful men in Rome, has summoned the Queen of Egypt to answer questions about her loyalty during recent conflicts. He expects her to come humbly, perhaps anxiously, aware that Rome's military might dwarfs Egypt's. Instead, Cleopatra arrives on a barge so magnificent that witnesses struggle to describe it. The sails are purple, the royal colour, dyed with that expensive pigment extracted from sea snails. The oars are silver, keeping time to the sound of flutes and harps. The queen herself reclines under a gold-spangled canopy, dressed as Venus, the goddess of love, while boys dressed as Cupids fan her with perfumed breezes. The effect is overwhelming, theatrical, divine. By the time she invites Antony to dinner, the power dynamic has shifted. She's not the one on trial anymore. She's the one in control. Cleopatra understood something that we're still learning. Food and feasting are never just about nutrition. They're about power, seduction, diplomacy, theatre, and memory. The way you feed someone, the setting you create, the ingredients you choose, all of these send messages more powerful than words. And Cleopatra, who spoke 9 languages, who was educated in mathematics and philosophy, who ruled one of the ancient world's wealthiest kingdoms, she was a master of this language of feasting. Let me tell you about the banquets she threw, starting with that first dinner for Mark Antony. According to the historian Plutarch, writing about 150 years after the events, Cleopatra prepared a feast of such extravagance that Antony's own attempts to reciprocate looked meagre by comparison. She covered the floors with roses a cubit deep. That's about 18 inches of rose petals carpeting every surface, filling the air with their scent. The couches were draped with purple cloth, the dishes served on gold plates, studded with jewels. The food itself was elaborate, course after course of delicacies prepared by teams of cooks, each dish timed to perfection. But here's what's really interesting. It wasn't just the wealth on display, though that was important. It was the message behind it. Cleopatra was demonstrating that Egypt's resources were vast, that she controlled them completely, and that she could choose to direct those resources toward Rome's benefit, or not, depending on how she was treated. She was also demonstrating sophistication, culture, refinement, showing this Roman general that Egyptian civilization was older, richer, more elegant than Rome's. She was seducing him, yes, but not just with her physical presence, with an entire lifestyle, a vision of what his life could be if he allied with her. And it worked. Antony fell completely under her spell, not because he was weak or stupid, he wasn't, but because Cleopatra crafted an experience so compelling, so seductive that resisting it meant giving up pleasure, beauty, and possibility. She turned the banquet into a weapon, and she won without a single soldier being deployed. Let me describe what an elite Egyptian banquet in Cleopatra's era actually involved, because the details matter. First, understand that dining was a ritual with strict protocols. Guests didn't sit in chairs at tables the way we do. They reclined on couches, propped up on their left elbows, leaving their right hands free to eat. This posture was associated with leisure and high status. Slaves and lower-class people sat when they ate. The elite reclined. The room would be arranged with these dining couches in a triclinium formation, 3 couches arranged in a U shape around a central table, where dishes were placed within easy reach. The most honored position was in a specific location, details that everyone understood instinctively, but that required study to master if you weren't born into that world. Where you were placed at the dinner told you exactly how the host valued you. Before eating, servants brought bowls of water and towels for washing hands. Throughout the meal, they'd circulate with more water and towels because you were eating with your hands, using bread to scoop food and fingers to pick up morsels. Cutlery as we know it didn't exist. There might be knives for cutting and spoons for liquids, but mostly you used your hands, which meant the texture of food, its temperature, its oiliness or dryness, all of that became part of the experience. The food itself would begin with appetizers, perhaps eggs, olives, small fish, salads. Then the main courses, multiple dishes presented simultaneously rather than in sequence. Roasted meats, whole birds, fish cooked in complex sauces. Ancient Egyptian cuisine had access to ingredients from Africa, the Mediterranean, and the trade routes reaching into Asia. There might be dates from North African oases, spices from India, wines from Greek islands. The variety itself was a statement of Egypt's position at the crossroads of the known world. Presentation mattered enormously. Birds might be roasted and then reassembled with their feathers so they looked alive. Dishes might be shaped like animals or mythological scenes. There are accounts of Roman banquets, and Egyptian ones likely followed similar patterns where cooks competed to create the most impressive visual effects. A dish that merely tasted good was insufficient. It needed to amaze. Between courses there would be entertainment. Musicians playing harps, lyres and flutes. Dancers, their bodies gleaming with oil, moving to rhythms that dated back thousands of years. Maybe acrobats. Maybe poets reciting verses, perhaps praising the host or the guests. The entertainment, like the food, was calibrated to the guest's status. More important guests meant more elaborate entertainment. Wine flowed throughout, mixed with water in varying proportions. The Egyptians had been making wine for thousands of years, and they understood fermentation, aging, the effects of different grapes and regions. They also added spices and honey to their wines, creating flavors that would taste exotic to our modern palates. Getting guests pleasantly drunk was part of the strategy. Wine loosened tongues, lowered inhibitions, made people more agreeable, more prone to making commitments they might reconsider when sober. Cleopatra would have orchestrated all of this personally, not cooking herself obviously, but directing her staff with precision, which wines for which courses, what topics of conversation to encourage, when to have musicians play something rousing and when to let the conversation flow. She was conducting a symphony where every element, food, drink, music, scent, lighting, worked together to create an effect. And the effect she wanted with Antony was to bind him to her, to make him associate Egypt with pleasure, beauty, and abundance. She wanted him to feel that Alexandria, her capital city, was the center of culture and civilization, not Rome. She wanted him to see himself not as a Roman conqueror dealing with a subject kingdom, but as a partner in a grand alliance, maybe even as a new Alexander, the Macedonian conqueror who had founded Alexandria and whose legacy Cleopatra claimed. It worked almost too well. Antony spent the winter of 4140 BCE in Alexandria, feasting, enjoying Cleopatra's company, largely ignoring his responsibilities back in Rome. They formed a social club they called the Inimitable Livers, dedicated to pleasure and extravagance. They would roam Alexandria at night in disguise, playing pranks, gambling, drinking, living like wealthy young people without responsibilities. It was scandalous and wonderful and completely incompatible with Antony's political position. Back in Rome, Antony's rivals, particularly Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, used this behavior against him. They painted Antony as corrupted by Eastern decadence, seduced away from Roman virtue by a foreign queen. They made Cleopatra into a monster, a witch, a whore, depending on the propaganda piece. They convinced the Roman Senate to declare war not on Antony, that would be civil war, but on Cleopatra, framing the conflict as Rome versus Egypt, civilization versus barbarism. But let me tell you about another famous banquet story, the one about the pearl. Pliny the Elder, writing about a century after Cleopatra's death, tells this tale. Cleopatra and Antony were having a contest about who could host the most expensive banquet. Antony had thrown elaborate feasts, spending what he thought were astronomical sums. Cleopatra claimed she would spend 10 million sesterces on a single meal, an amount so vast Antony didn't believe it possible. At the designated banquet, the food was fine, but not exceptionally extravagant. Antony began to mock her, saying she'd failed to meet her boast. Then, for the second course, servants brought Cleopatra a single cup of wine or possibly vinegar. Sources vary. She removed one of her pearl earrings, a massive pearl that was one of the largest ever known, worth a fortune by itself, and she dropped it into the liquid. The pearl began to dissolve, the calcium carbonate reacting with the acidic wine or vinegar. When it had fully dissolved, she drank the mixture. One earring alone exceeded the value of Antony's entire feast. Now let's pause here, because there are problems with this story. Pearls don't dissolve that quickly in wine, even very acidic wine. It would take hours, possibly days, not the minutes the story implies. So either the story is pure legend, or there's some detail lost. Maybe the pearl was ground into powder first, or maybe the wine was actually a much stronger acid. But here's what matters. The story was told, was believed, was repeated. It became part of Cleopatra's legend. And whether it literally happened or not, it communicated something true about her approach to power. She was willing to destroy wealth to make a point. She valued winning the psychological game over preserving material goods. She understood that the story of the dissolved pearl would spread, would be talked about, and would enhance her reputation for extravagance and daring. She was playing a long game where perception was more important than reality. This is what separates a meal from a political weapon. A meal fills stomachs. A banquet fills minds with stories, memories, impressions. Cleopatra's guests would leave her feasts and tell others what they'd experienced. They'd describe the rose petals, the gold dishes, the entertainment, the incredible flavors. They'd talk about how they felt, how Cleopatra treated them, what conversations happened. Each guest became a messenger, spreading her influence far beyond the original event. She also understood hosting as a form of intelligence gathering. At a banquet, when wine flows and people relax, they talk. They reveal their concerns, their ambitions, their fears. They complain about rivals. They boast about plans. A skilled host, listening carefully, can learn as much from a dinner party as a spy network might discover in months. Cleopatra spoke multiple languages. She could converse directly with Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, Persians, understanding nuances that would be lost in translation. Every banquet was a chance to gather information, and she used food itself as a message. Serving someone ingredients from their homeland was a gesture of welcome and understanding. Serving rare, expensive ingredients demonstrated wealth and connections. The complexity of dishes showed the sophistication of Egyptian culture. Every course was communication. Think about how different this is from how we often treat meals today. We eat quickly, sometimes alone, often while distracted by screens. We see food as fuel or maybe pleasure, but rarely as a political or social tool. Cleopatra would have found this incomprehensible. For her, every meal with another person was an opportunity, a negotiation, a performance. In the end, Cleopatra's strategy failed, but not because of any flaw in her approach. She and Antony were defeated by Octavian's forces at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Both committed suicide rather than be captured and paraded through Rome as prisoners. Egypt became a Roman province. Octavian, who became Emperor Augustus, worked systematically to destroy Cleopatra's reputation, painting her as everything Rome feared and despised about foreign influence. But the memory of her banquets survived. 2,000 years later, we're still talking about those feasts, still telling the story of the dissolved pearl, still fascinated by this queen who turned hospitality into statecraft. In a way, she won the immortality she sought. Even if she lost the kingdom, lie quietly now and imagine the scent of rose petals 18 inches deep, the glow of oil lamps on gold plates, the sound of music drifting through warm Egyptian air. Imagine being so confident, so skilled that you could invite the enemy to dinner and make them your ally before dessert was served. Imagine understanding power so completely that you knew when to deploy armies and when to deploy banquets, and which weapon would be more effective. Breathe deeply. Let that rose-scented air fill your lungs. We're not quite done with Cleopatra. There's one more story to tell, the most extravagant of all. Let's stay with Cleopatra a little longer because that pearl story deserves its own chapter. Not just the event itself, but what it meant, what it tells us about wealth and power and performance in the ancient world. Close your eyes and let me paint you a picture of what that moment might have been like, filling in the details that Pliny's brief account leaves out. You're reclining on a couch in one of Cleopatra's palaces in Alexandria. The palace is right on the water, built on a promontory reaching into the Mediterranean, so you can hear waves gently lapping at the foundations and feel the sea breeze cooling the warm evening. The room is lit by dozens of oil lamps, their flickering light reflecting off the polished marble floors, the gilded furniture, the jeweled cups and plates laid out for the feast. Cleopatra is there, of course, the center of attention without seeming to try. She's in her late 20s at this point, though ancient sources disagree about her exact age. Contemporary accounts suggest she wasn't conventionally beautiful by the standards of her time, but she was compelling. Her voice was musical, her conversation brilliant, and she had a presence that commanded attention. She wore those famous pearls, one in each ear, massive teardrop-shaped gems that caught the lamplight and glowed with an inner luster. Mark Antony is across from her, a big man, broad-shouldered, with the weathered face of someone who's spent years on military campaigns. He's in his late 40s, powerful, experienced, and not easily impressed. He's seen triumphs in Rome, conquered territories, stood beside Julius Caesar, and yet here he's slightly off balance, dealing with a woman who refuses to play by the expected rules. They've been having this ongoing competition, this game about who can host the more extravagant feast. It started playfully perhaps, but it's become more serious. A proxy battle for who has more resources, more creativity, more audacity. Antony has thrown feasts featuring rare delicacies brought from across the Mediterranean. Whole dolphins, flamingo tongues, dormice fattened on nuts and honey. He's spent fortunes, or what he considered fortunes, and then Cleopatra makes her bet. 10 million sesterces for a single meal. To put that in perspective, a Roman legionary, a common soldier, earned about 900 sesterces per year. A successful merchant might make 20,000 sesterces annually. 10 million sesterces was enough to finance a military campaign, to build a temple, to feed a city for months. It was, by any measure, an impossible sum to spend on one meal. Antony laughs it off. He assumes she's joking or exaggerating. But Cleopatra has a judge appointed, a Roman friend of Antony's named Lucius Plancus, to verify whether she meets the challenge. The dinner is scheduled. Antony arrives expecting something mind-blowing, perhaps food covered in gold leaf, perhaps dishes made from peacock brains and parrot tongues, the kinds of extravagances Romans associated with decadent Eastern luxury. Instead, the first course is nice but not extraordinary. Good food, well prepared, but nothing that obviously costs a fortune. Antony begins to mock her gently, teasingly. Has the great queen of Egypt failed to meet her boast? Is she admitting defeat? His friends laugh. The mood is light. Cleopatra smiles. She's not bothered. She calls for the second course. Servants bring her a single cup, filled with wine or vinegar. The sources disagree, but let's say it's a strong, acidic wine, something sour enough to make your mouth pucker if you drank it straight. She reaches up and removes one of her pearl earrings. Now these weren't just any pearls. They were legendary. Ancient sources claim they were originally owned by the kings of the East, brought to Egypt as part of Cleopatra's inheritance when the Ptolemaic dynasty acquired them through conquest or trade. Each pearl was enormous, perfectly shaped, with a luster that seemed almost alive. They were famous enough that people knew about them, talked about them. They were symbols of Cleopatra's wealth and status, instantly recognizable. She holds the pearl up so everyone can see it. The room has gone quiet. Antony isn't laughing anymore. He's starting to understand that something significant is happening, but he doesn't quite believe it yet. What is she doing? Cleopatra drops the pearl into the cup. Now here's where the story gets chemically interesting and where historians get skeptical. Pearls are made of calcium carbonate layered around an irritant by an oyster over years. Calcium carbonate does react with acid. It's the same reaction that creates carbon dioxide bubbles when you put vinegar on baking soda. But it's not a fast reaction, especially not with a large, dense pearl in relatively weak acid like wine. Some historians think the story is pure invention, impossible propaganda. Others suggest the pearl might have been crushed first, increasing surface area. Some propose the wine was actually a much stronger acid, something like the ancient equivalent of battery acid. Others point out that Cleopatra had access to the best scientists and engineers of her time. Alexandria was the intellectual capital of the ancient world. She could have had someone figure out the chemistry to make it work faster. But let's say it happened, or something close to it happened. The pearl sits in the cup, and slowly it begins to break down. Bubbles form on its surface, the liquid clouds with dissolved pearl. Maybe it takes minutes, maybe longer. Maybe servants periodically replace the acid solution to speed the process. However it's done, the pearl dissolves. This priceless, irreplaceable gem becomes a cloudy, probably bitter liquid, and Cleopatra drinks it. She lifts the cup and swallows the dissolved pearl, consuming a fortune. Antony stares. The judge Plancus does some quick calculations in his head. One of those pearls alone, according to Pliny, was worth the challenge 10 million sesterces. Cleopatra has won. She spent the required amount on a single meal, or really a single drink. She's destroyed something priceless to prove a point. And the meal isn't even over. There's still actual food to come. Cleopatra reaches for the second pearl, the matching earring. She's going to do it again, going to double down. But Plancus stops her. He declares her the winner. There's no need to destroy the second pearl. Antony concedes defeat. The game is over. Cleopatra has demonstrated in the most dramatic way possible that her wealth is so vast she can literally consume it without concern. Now let's talk about what this means. On the surface, it's a story about extravagance, about the excesses of the wealthy, the kind of story Romans loved to tell about Eastern monarchs to prove how decadent and wasteful they were. But look deeper. What Cleopatra actually did was perform a magic trick, a piece of political theatre so brilliant that people are still talking about it 2,000 years later. First, she demonstrated wealth, not just having wealth, but being willing to destroy it. This is important. Hoarding wealth suggests you need it, that you're concerned about the future, that your resources are finite. Destroying wealth suggests the opposite. You have so much that losing this amount means nothing. You can afford to be wasteful because you're that rich. It's like the potlatch ceremonies of Pacific Northwest indigenous peoples, where leaders would destroy valuable goods to demonstrate their status and power. Second, she created a story. If she'd just thrown another expensive banquet, it would have been forgotten, lost among thousands of other expensive banquets. But by doing something shocking, something unforgettable, she created a narrative that people would repeat. Everyone who attended that dinner went out and told others. Those people told more people. The story spread throughout the ancient world. Cleopatra's name became associated with ultimate extravagance. 2 millennia later, we're still telling it. Third, she demonstrated control. The pearls were hers to destroy. She wasn't a powerless queen dependent on Rome's goodwill. She was a ruler with resources so vast she could waste them on a bet. This was important messaging for Antony and for Rome. Egypt wasn't a poor province begging for protection. It was a wealthy kingdom that Rome needed as an ally. Fourth, she made it personal. She didn't have servants destroy the pearl. She did it herself. She removed her own jewelry, dropped it into the cup, and drank it down. She quite literally incorporated that wealth into her body. It became part of her, consumed, digested, transformed. The symbolism is almost too perfect, the queen consuming her kingdom's treasures, making them inseparable from herself, and finally she created a bond with Antony. They'd shared this moment, this shocking, unforgettable event. They were co-conspirators in extravagance. She'd performed for him, had impressed him, had created a memory that would tie him to her. Every time he thought of that night, he'd remember, not just the pearl, but the entire experience, the setting, the emotions, the sheer audacity of the woman who'd done it. This is mastery of soft power. Cleopatra couldn't defeat Rome militarily. Egypt's legions weren't strong enough, but she could seduce, influence, persuade, and manipulate. She could make allies of potential enemies. She could turn banquets into weapons and jewelry, into political statements. She understood that power isn't just about armies and gold. It's about stories, about what people believe, about capturing imaginations. The second pearl, the one she didn't dissolve, had an interesting fate. After Cleopatra's death, Octavian seized it along with the rest of Egypt's treasures. According to Pliny, he had it cut in half, and each half was made into an earring for a statue of Venus in the Pantheon in Rome. So the pearl that was meant to stay intact ended up destroyed anyway, just in a different way by a different conqueror, for a different purpose. Even in defeat, Cleopatra's treasures became stories, became legends, became more than mere objects. Think about what objects mean in your own life. Most of us accumulate things, we hold on to them, we feel anxious about losing them. We find security in possession. Cleopatra had the confidence to do the opposite. to destroy something priceless for effect. That's a kind of power most people never access, the power to let go, to sacrifice, to choose the story over the thing. Of course, there's something tragic about it too. Cleopatra died by suicide at age 39, her kingdom conquered, her children's fates uncertain. All that wealth, all that power, all those banquets and dissolved pearls, they couldn't save her in the end. Political and military realities eventually overwhelmed even the most brilliant propaganda and the most seductive feasts. Octavian won. Rome won. Egypt became a province for 4 centuries, but late at night, in the quiet, you can still imagine that moment. The pearl dropping into the wine, the slow fizz as it dissolves, the cloudy liquid in the cup. Cleopatra's smile as she raises it to her lips. The taste, probably bitter and strange, but worth it for the looks on everyone's faces. The knowledge that she's just created a story that will outlive empires. Let your eyes close. Feel the weight of that pearl earring, heavy with history and value. Imagine the courage it takes to let it go, to drop it into acid, to watch it dissolve. Imagine the freedom in that gesture, the sheer audacity. And imagine the taste, alkaline and bitter, but also triumphant, the taste of victory, the taste of legend. Breathe slowly. We're going to take one more journey to a secret ritual in the mountains, to women gathering under moonlight to honor ancient mysteries. Now we travel to the edge of the known world, to the mountains of Illyria, the ancient region that covered parts of what we now call Albania, Croatia, Bosnia, and Montenegro. The time is roughly the 3rd century BCE, though these practices are much older, passed down through generations long before written records. The landscape is rugged, harsh, mountains rising steep from the Adriatic coast, valleys dense with oak and pine forests, rivers cutting through stone. This is a place where ancient gods never quite died, where Roman conquest changed the surface but left the depths untouched. I want to tell you about a group called the Daughters of Bindus, women who gathered in secret to perform rituals under the full moon, honoring a goddess whose name appears in scattered inscriptions and whose worship left traces in folklore that persisted into the 20th century. This is history at its haziest, assembled from archaeological fragments. Brief mentions in Greek and Roman sources who didn't quite understand what they were seeing, and later folk practices that might preserve echoes of earlier beliefs. Bindus, or sometimes Bindusa, was a goddess associated with the moon, with water, with the wilderness, and with the mysteries of birth and death. She was not part of the official pantheon that Greek and Roman conquerors brought. She was older, indigenous, rooted in the landscape itself. The Romans, when they came, did what they usually did with local deities they didn't quite understand. They tried to equate her with Diana or Artemis, the Greco-Roman moon goddesses, but the connection was imperfect. Bindus was something else, something that resisted easy translation. Her worshippers were primarily women, though not exclusively, and among the women there was an inner circle, initiates, who called themselves her daughters, and who performed rituals that were kept secret from outsiders and from men in their own communities. We know about them because of a few inscriptions found on stone altars in remote mountain locations, because of references in ancient geographers' accounts, and because of practices recorded by ethnographers in the 19th and early 20th centuries that seem to echo much older rituals. Let me take you to one of these gatherings. It's a night in late summer. The moon is full, hanging huge and silver over the mountains. A group of women are making their way up a difficult path, climbing away from their village toward a sacred grove high in the hills. They move in silence, each carrying something, a basket of offerings, a clay lamp, a bundle of herbs. They've left their homes after dark, telling husbands and children they're going to help a neighbor with a birth or tend to a sick relative, ordinary excuses that won't raise questions. But they're really going to the grove, to the goddess, to the moon. The grove is ancient. Oak trees, their trunks thick enough that 3 women couldn't circle them with linked arms, their branches spreading wide overhead. In the center is a spring, water bubbling up from deep underground, flowing into a stone basin that's been carved with symbols, spirals and crescents, signs that predate writing. Near the spring is an altar, rough stone, dark with the blood of countless sacrifices. The women arrive one by one, greeting each other quietly, with embraces and murmured words in a dialect that's distinct from what they speak in daily life. Ritual language, older words preserved for these occasions. They range in age from teenagers to elderly women, some bent with years but still making the climb because this is important. This is obligation and joy and identity all woven together. They begin by washing in the spring water, stripping to their shifts or sometimes to bare skin, letting the cold water run over their hands and faces and feet. The water is sacred, connected to the goddess, carrying her power. They murmur prayers as they wash, thanking Bindus for health, for children, for the harvest, for the water that keeps them alive. Then they light their lamps from a central fire that's always kept burning in the grove, maintained by whoever makes the pilgrimage there. The fire might be hundreds of years old, never allowed to go completely out, fed with oak wood and juniper, woods that burn cleanly and give a good scent. The smoke rises through the oak branches toward the moon, carrying prayers upward. The offerings are laid on the altar, bread baked specially for this night, small cakes made with honey and shaped like moons. Cheese. Sometimes a chicken or a lamb, if the community can spare it, will be sacrificed quickly. Its blood poured on the altar stone, its meat cooked and shared among the worshippers. Herbs gathered from the mountainside, plants with healing or prophetic properties, mugwort and wormwood and yarrow, flowers and personal items, small things the women have brought representing their prayers. A lock of a sick child's hair, a piece of cloth from a wedding dress, a fertility charm. One woman, usually the eldest or the most experienced in the mysteries, leads the ritual. She calls on Bindus in the old language, reciting hymns that have been passed down mother to daughter for generations, prayers that no one writes down because writing them would diminish their power and expose them to outsiders who might misunderstand or suppress them. The hymns describe the goddess as both gentle and fierce, as both the new moon soft and promising and the full moon bright and commanding. She is the force that pulls the tides and the blood. She is the light in darkness, the path through the wilderness, the protector of women in childbirth, the guide of souls to the afterlife. She is the oak and the water, the deer in the forest and the owl in the night. She is everything beyond the controlled, civilized world of villages and farms. She is the wild that persists. After the prayers, there's dancing. The women link hands and move in a circle around the altar, stepping in rhythm to a song they all know, their voices rising and falling together. The dance is simple but hypnotic, Repeated patterns that go on and on, the same steps, the same song, until they're no longer thinking about it, until their minds drift into a different state, trance-like, open to visions and messages from the goddess. Some women might break from the circle, might whirl alone in ecstatic movement, possessed by the divine presence. Others might speak prophecy, words bubbling up from deep within, predictions about the coming year's harvest, warnings about dangers, reassurances about difficult decisions. No one questions these utterances. The goddess speaks through whoever she chooses. Later, when the ecstasy has passed, they sit and share the food, eating the sacrificed meat, drinking wine that's been mixed with water from the sacred spring. They talk, but not about the ritual, about their lives, about problems they face, about concerns they can't voice in the village where men might overhear and disapprove. Here they have freedom. Here they can speak as themselves, not as daughters or wives or mothers, but as individual souls connected to something larger than family or community. This is where they pass down knowledge. The experienced women teach the younger ones about herbs, which plants can ease childbirth pains, which can prevent conception, which can heal infections or fevers. They teach midwifery skills, how to turn a breech baby, how to stop hemorrhaging, how to know when a birth is going wrong and what to do. They teach how to read weather signs, how to predict storms, when to plant and when to harvest. All of this is framed as the goddess's wisdom, gifts from Bindus to her daughters, but it's also practical knowledge that keeps the community alive. They also teach resistance, how to maintain some autonomy in a world where women have little legal power, how to protect each other, how to preserve knowledge that men, especially foreign conquerors, might try to suppress. The rituals are acts of defiance as much as devotion. They're maintaining an identity that Rome, later Christianity, later every occupying power, would try to erase. Now let me tell you what we actually know historically and what we're inferring. We have several inscriptions to Bindus from the Illyrian region, mostly dating to the Roman imperial period, roughly 1st to 3rd centuries CE. These inscriptions are brief, usually just dedications to Bindus from so-and-so in fulfillment of a vow. Some include the phrase Bindus the moon or Bindus of the spring. One inscription, found near a spring in what's now Albania, includes a symbol that might represent female genitalia, suggesting fertility associations. Greek and Roman authors occasionally mention Illyrian religious practices involving women and moon worship, though always from an outsider's perspective, often dismissive or sensationalized. They describe the women as superstitious, as practicing magic, as engaging in mysterious nocturnal rituals that seem suspicious to rational Greek and Roman minds. And then there's the folklore. Even into the 20th century, ethnographers recorded practices in remote parts of the Balkans that might preserve echoes of ancient ritual. Women gathering at springs on certain moon phases, all-female healing ceremonies, folk songs that invoke a moon goddess by names that might be corrupted versions of Bindus. None of this is definitive proof of continuous practice from ancient times. Cultures change, beliefs evolve, but the pattern suggests continuity, a thread running from ancient worship to folk practice. So when I describe the ritual in detail, I'm extrapolating from these fragments, imagining how it might have been, based on what we know about similar women's rituals in other cultures and times. This is historical fiction, grounded in historical fact, but it's important to be honest about where the line is. Why does this matter? Why spend our last quiet moments together thinking about these obscure rituals in a remote place 2,000 years ago? because they represent something important, something that's been systematically forgotten or suppressed in most historical accounts. The spiritual and intellectual lives of ordinary women, the ways women created community and autonomy even in patriarchal societies, the knowledge systems women maintained separately from official, male-dominated institutions. Most history is written about kings and generals, about wars and empires, about the public world dominated by men. The daughters of Bindus existed in the spaces between, in the private, the secret, the nighttime world that men rarely saw or recorded. And because they weren't recorded, they were nearly lost. We have to dig for them, to piece together their stories from scraps, to honor them by at least trying to remember. Imagine being one of those women, climbing the mountain path by moonlight, feeling the cool night air on your skin, hearing the other women's footsteps ahead and behind you. You're tired from the day's work, your hands rough from labor, but you're climbing anyway because this is important. This connects you to your mother and her mother and all the mothers back to the beginning. You're climbing because on this mountain, by this spring, you're not just someone's daughter or wife. You're a daughter of Bindus. You're part of something ancient and powerful. You reach the grove. You wash in the sacred water, feeling it shock you awake, washing away the day and the ordinary world. You join the circle, linking hands with women you've known your whole life and others you're just meeting, all of you connected by this shared practice. You dance and sing until your mind quiets and something deeper rises, something beyond words, beyond thought. You feel connected to the earth beneath your feet, to the moon above, to the wild forest around you. You feel seen by something vast and benevolent. You feel, for a few hours, free. And then you walk back down the mountain as dawn approaches, back to your ordinary life, but carrying something inside you. A secret, a strength, a connection. You go back to baking bread and tending children and doing all the uncounted labor that keeps the world functioning. But you know that in a month, when the moon is full again, you'll climb that mountain again. And the goddess will be waiting. The rituals ended eventually. Christianity came with its official patriarchal structure that had no place for goddess worship or women's mysteries. The sacred groves were cut down or converted to churches. The springs were rededicated to Christian saints, the old prayers replaced with new ones. Women who continued the old practices risked being accused of witchcraft. The daughters of Bindus faded, became folklore, became cautionary tales, and became forgotten. But on certain nights in certain mountain places in the Balkans, people still say you can hear women's voices singing in a language no one speaks anymore. Still say there are springs where the water has special properties, where women go quietly to pray for fertility or health. Still say the moon watches over those who remember her names, even the forgotten ones. And now, dear friend, we've reached the end of our journey together. We've walked through medieval streets where your shampoo could kill you. We've learned why silence was survival when the church controlled all knowledge. We've stepped into the arena with gladiatrices who fought for their lives while crowds roared. We've reclined at Cleopatra's banquet, watching her dissolve a fortune in a cup of wine just to prove she could. We've tasted the complexity of ancient political feasts, and we climbed a mountain at midnight to dance in a sacred grove with women who worshipped a goddess whose name time was almost erased. All of these are true stories, or as true as we can make them from the fragments history left us. All of them are about survival, about power, about the ways people navigate worlds very different from ours. All of them remind us that the past was stranger, harder, and more interesting than we usually imagine. As you drift now into sleep, may you carry these stories with you into dreams. May you dream of rose petals and moonlight, of courage and cleverness, of all the people who lived and struggled and loved and died in times we can barely imagine. May you sleep deeply and peacefully, grateful for the quiet comfort around you, the safety and freedom that so many generations fought to build. If you drifted off somewhere along the way, let me know below. Tell me which story caught you or which moment made you think. And if this helped you find peace tonight, if this eased you into rest, then it did exactly what it was meant to do. Sweet dreams, friend. Until we meet again in these quiet corners of history, good night.